Hello, everybody. Welcome to Terrestrial Projects and to an element of Terrestrial Projects, the Time Capsule Flexing Foresight. We hope all of you with us in this moment are in a space of rootedness and centered connection and are affirming life, relation, justice, and community as a response to the injustices prevalent in your own community, in your country, or beyond, especially at this moment in Palestine, the Sudan, and the Congo. To affirm life and the right to believe in future visions of existence in the face of genocidal attacks is to resist the dehumanization of the colonialist legacy. And it's with that that we open and believe in this project, Terrestrial. So for those of you who are on Instagram and you would like to watch this video in its full production tonight, we encourage you to please watch on YouTube via the link in our bio. Through YouTube, you can also switch on captions and automated translations if you are in a different language. Due to unforeseen circumstances, we're not able to offer American Sign Language simultaneous interpretation for this conversation. And we are very sorry to be limiting the access of this conversation because of that. As mentioned, the captions are available if you're watching through YouTube, and we will be having sign language interpretation for the following subsequent conversations of this series. The Time Capsule is an element of Terrestrial, which is a multidisciplinary project that weaves together performance, choreography, speculative futurist thought, and equity-based models of cooperation to recalibrate social, cultural, and physical existence. This project was conceived of by McKinney, who is currently in Durham, North Carolina. Where are you, McKinney? Yay, there's McKinney, everybody. Woohoo! McKinney conceived of the project and invited the other co-directors, which include Anderson Feliciano, all the way from Belo Horizonte, Brazil. Hi, Anderson. And the third co-director is myself, Nefertiti, and I'm speaking from San Francisco, California. And together we make up this multilingual transgeographic space that is a collaborative of Black, Indigenous, and Mestiza artists from lands currently called Brazil and the US. Together, we are developing a body of performance-based time capsules that interweave imagined fragments of Blackness and indigeneity throughout the past several decades, patching together the plurality of these phenomena through invented court and ceremony dances situated in the very distant future. We are very excited to premiere the first installation of these capsules, The Sprout, in March 2025. The time capsule element of this project is a shared exercise in speculative remembering and predicting, asking what could be, what has been, and what probably was from a deep place of knowledge, study, and creativity. The first segment of this module brings Terrestrial's directors into conversation with 4 fascinating experts in the observation of life, of time, of change over time, of our species in relationship to planet, and of the infinities among which we live and die. So, very exciting material, super exciting events that we have in store for you. And if you'd like to support this and other events that we have coming up, you can support our potential to dream elaboratively, collectively, and in a well-resourced way. You can consider donating to Terrestrial. You can go to terrestrialprojects.com/donate. This will appear on screen at various moments throughout the conversation tonight. There it is. Woo! Great. So I'm very excited to be opening this segment of the Time Capsule today with our first expert, Zizwe Mtafuta-Ukweli, who I will introduce shortly. We encourage all of you watching, listening, feeling virtually to be actively involved in the conversation. You can leave comments, questions, desires in the chat, and in a bit, we'll open the line on StreamYard for Black and Indigenous folks watching to call in and to interact with us on screen if you'd like. Please let us know that you're out there and that we're together in this magical moment. So one more time, welcome everyone. How is everybody doing? What are you all craving these days in this exact moment in general? Feel free to leave a message in the chat to let us know. My name is Nefertiti, as I had said earlier, one of the co-directors. I am an Afro-Indigenous femme-presenting woman with light brown skin. I have shoulder-length, dark brown curly hair that is out and free, with brown eyes and dangling long earrings that have blue shells at the tips and white long shells in the middle. I'm wearing also a turquoise and goldish brown gold colored poncho with horizontal lines and a diamond-shaped embroidery of the same colors. I'd like to also invite my guest Zizwe to present a description of himself.
Be here.
Oh, there we go.
I'm glad to be here with you and the project. And to describe myself, I should say I'm an older gentleman who thinks of myself as about 6'2", but I'm really about 5'8". But to just give you a sense for those of you who can't see me, you can think of me as tall, but I'm not. But I am handsome. And I have a few wrinkles on the top of my head, which has grown taller than my hair. So you can't see my hair on top of my head. It's only down at the lower part of my head, which I call a beard and a mustache. But I do have some intrinsic wrinkles of wisdom above some salt and peppered eyebrows on thinly framed glasses so that I can engage in this conversation with a clairvoyant view. My shoulders are slightly snooped. Slightly slooped. And I'm not really. I'm wearing a kind of mild colored shirt, and I don't look anywhere as good as Nefertiti in her presentation of colors and scheme. I have a bunch of books behind me, but other than that, you're not really missing much if you can't see me. But imagine me as a great poetic voice as I share some information with you.
Thank you so much, Zizwe, for your very detailed description of yourself.
Thank you.
Welcome and welcome. So before I give a more proper introduction to our wonderful, brilliant guest today, Zizwe, I'd like to walk us all through a brief grounding exercise, just to get everybody in their bodies, in their space, and in connection with each other. So I invite anyone who is watching, who is listening, who is reading, to get in a comfortable position. So whether that's lying down, sitting down, standing up, to just find a position that you want to be in. And go ahead and close your eyes if that's available to you. And just notice your breath. So this is non-judgmental noticing. So just noticing where your breath is starting from and where it's ending. Noticing the space that opens up when you inhale and the space, how that space changes when you exhale. And as you're breathing, notice also how different surfaces of your body are responding to the surfaces of the environment around you. As you exhale, do you surrender more into the floor? As you inhale, do you come more off the floor? Just notice how your body is connecting to the surfaces that it's touching through your breath. And as you're noticing your breath expand as you inhale and condense space as you exhale, go ahead and invite your body to respond to that expansion and condensing. So, whether that's making more space in your shoulders as you inhale and bringing everything back in towards your center as you exhale. Just noticing where your breath takes your body as you inhale and you exhale. And if you feel the urge to expand out and engage your arms, your hands, your legs in that expansion, on that inhale, and bringing it all in as you exhale, if that's available to you. Just allowing expansion to exist and a retreat, guided by your breath. And we'll do that one more time, one big expansion. And one nice retreat. Thank you all for doing that with me, for trusting me in that exercise to root us in our place and with each other. I will now introduce Zizwe Mtafuta-Ukweli. Zizwe is a Pan-African social scientist and a historian by training, and also a parent, a grandparent, and great-grandparent by destiny. Known as Professor Z in the Temple of Hip Hop Culture, he has a Ph.D. and an and an MA from Temple University in Africalogy, an MA in Interdisciplinary Social Sciences, and a BA in Afro-American Studies. I had the great privilege of meeting Zizwe last month in our first gathering conversation with all 4 experts that will be part of this series, as well as the directors of this project. As someone who develops performance work through embodied remembering exercises, I was truly fascinated by Zizwe's assessments of why we remember certain hows and whats, and why we forget others as part of an almost filtering-like process connected to the dynamics between tradition, innovation, and environmental conditions. And he does all of this while being generously rooted in, quote, contributing to optimizing the agency of our species, such that we are able to enjoy more of the galactic potential of life, end quote. So welcome, Zizwe, to the Time Capsule, and you're welcome to share any words or additions before we begin our conversation.
I thought you captured our last session so brilliantly that I have very little to say. I think to get into these continuous views of the past and the future right now in the present. So I'm ready.
Let's do it. Great. I'm glad I was able to be so succinct with my introduction.
Great.
But, it helps to have somebody to, like you made it so easy. So I give a lot of that credit to you. So before we go on, I want to also announce that you'll see streaming below at various moments during our conversation a link at which you can make donations to Zizwe and his wife Evelyn's Older Testament tours, which are historical tours through the ancient Kemet, which many of us know as Egypt. Zizwe, would you like to say more about that?
Just a brief thing about it. We usually encourage, if you decide to participate with us, we encourage people to come as either teachers or preachers, because the reason it's called the Older Testament Tour is in our studies and in our research, we've found stories that are in the Old Testament, in the Quran, and in the New Testament on the walls, in the temples in the Nile Valley, as we look at ancient Egyptian, ancient African society in Egypt, uh,
Mhm.
also called Kemet, which is the Black nation or Black municipality. The word Kemet means that. And we've found, because I studied hieroglyphs, Middle Egyptian grammar,
Mm,
I'm able to read plenty of the walls that are there. And we saw um, proof of Older Testament contributions to what we consider the Old Testament, the New Testament, Quran, and other various texts that much of the world adheres to today.
mhm,
Saw some of the stuff there, and because I'm able to read it and share it with my students, um, they're able to understand some of the linguistic proof
mm,
before Jesus was born, the concept of Christianity and even the concepts of Judaism, right there in the African Nile Valley. Um, and so that's why we call it the Older Testament tour, and we encourage preachers and teachers to come so that they can get the unvarnished interpretation of really how people who were in Africa at the time were viewing um, the cosmology and the religious perspective, spiritual perspective that was attempting to bring peace on earth.
mhm.
Yes, and so,
Wow.
yeah,
That
so
sounds really fascinating. I already expressed to you that I have an interest in going. So,
yeah.
so there is the link, folks, venmo.com/Evelyn Davis Poe, so that they can continue to do these remarkable educational, in-depth tours in ancient Kemet.
I,
Okay,
I have one last thing to say about this.
go
So
ahead.
right now it becomes even more important because there is a rising um, xenophobia
Mm,
amongst some of the Arab intellectuals that live in Egypt that are trying to shake off the Afrocentric interpretation that
mm,
the original founders of that society were a very melanated group of Africans from the heart of Africa. And people
mhm,
who study the history will realize that the civilization of ancient Egypt or Kemet starts from the south and moves progressively to the north.
mm,
It
mhm,
didn't start all in one place. It started really in Kush and what's called where the Nubians existed, or
mhm,
Kush is the better known name, which today would be around the area of Sudan.
mhm,
And that's the cultural base of the development of the society that formed inside of what we call Egypt now,
mhm, mhm,
later on. So this is important because a lot of people don't realize that the original founders of Egypt were black people, dark black people that look like the people in Sudan right now.
mhm.
Yeah. So I just wanted to
Thank
throw that out.
you. Thank you. Yes,
Mhm.
it's important to center that intention as well. Thank
Mhm.
you, Zizwe.
You're welcome.
So we are going to get started. I'm going to begin asking the first of three questions. And Zizwe, there's no limit on time for these questions. You're free to enter the speculative journey and take us with you wherever we go. I guess you could think of the viewers and I as kind of the curious companions on the journey. And
Okay.
you are the tour guide asking about a landmark we may have passed or a pathway not taken, or a direction we wonder about. And I will offer both my own questions, questions from the viewers, or my other co directors that align with stretching imaginations as much as possible. So, is everybody ready? Okay, great. So, for the first question, our first speculation, Zizwe, what if we were all to speak the same language?
Okay, as a prompt, I think I gave some consideration to a question like this.
Mhm.
If we had, if we were all able to understand each other and spoke the same language, there would have been a lot less wars in the time that the species has been on the planet. For instance, to give you an example of what happens when we don't speak the same language, when the Italians tried to make a peace deal with what they considered Abyssinia or Ethiopia in the past, in the 1890s, the Italians wrote two different contracts of peace with the Ethiopians. One was in Amharic, which was the local language of the Ethiopians, and one was in Italian. They said two different things. And when the Ethiopians found out that the agreement between them, between the Italians and the Ethiopians, declared to Europe that if you have any business to do with Ethiopia, then you should go through Italy. Once the Ethiopians found that out, it enraged them and made them go to war with Italy. And Italy subsequently was defeated in the war at the Battle of Ottawa in 1896. This is just an example.
Mhm.
Another example is the um, as the European invaders were coming to the Americas, um, sometimes the interpretation of of what they understood as the rights of the indigenous people were overlooked in a way that the indigenous people couldn't imagine that some people would be looking at it like that. I'm sharing my resources with you, but that doesn't mean now that these are your resources that you can put a fence around. But the linguistic understanding was lacking. It wasn't there. And our kindness, those of the indigenous people's kindness, was treated as blindness.
Mhm.
And I think if they understood the same language, humans, I think xenophilia, the love of other cultures, would have outstripped xenophobia, where some cultures are afraid of the cultures they don't know and can't communicate to them. So it sometimes leads to very dangerous relationships. By now, we would be on a few planets,
Mhm.
given the time that we've been in existence. If we could, if we were able to conquer space, which sometimes takes our language and changes it over space, language changes. I grew up in New York, and when I moved to California, I even noticed that even just a few 3,000 miles in a society that considered itself one society spoke differently. I learned through the Ebonics of the way that Black people speak, people of African descent speak in the United States. I learned that even the Ebonics were peculiar to which coast I was on because of the space. But if we could all speak the same languages, there would have been a lot less confusion in our working together. And I think that this would have been one of the ways that we would have moved much more progressively further in our relationship. I mean, everybody remembers, not everybody remembers, but a lot of people will remember the whole concept of the Tower of Babel, how people were growing up, they were going up so far that just the space and the distance of the Tower of Babel made different languages become not as understood as they were before they built this giant tower. And that tower can be a metaphor of social relations and societies that have been built where people on the top don't hear the people on the bottom, regardless of how loud the voices are. The language is not understood, and sometimes this ends in social violence like we've seen in Generation Z in Kenya as they fought against the taxes that the ruling population wanted to put on the masses. The masses told them, don't do that. We will destroy stuff. But they didn't listen. Even though they had the same language, they didn't understand the same concepts that were being presented. So Gen Z and some of the millennials burnt down the parliament building in Kenya just recently.
Mhm.
Another example of when people are not speaking the same language, even if they have the same language, but they don't understand the concepts of the message, it can cause many social problems
Mhm.
that slow us down in our advancement.
Mhm. I have a question for you, Zizwe, and I always I also I work as an interpreter, so I think about language a lot and what gets lost in translation,
Yes.
and what gets reinterpreted and reframed, and that's informed by a cultural reference of who's interpreting, right? You can't sort of
Yes.
um, be sort of objective to that. And I always think about what makes, well, in this context of thinking about what makes something universal and what makes a language a language. I'm thinking about this moment that we're in where, let's say the cell phone. A lot of different cross cultural spaces use the cell phone and understand interface of the cell phone, what to click, what to do. Like, is that understood as a language? And if not, why? And then in imagining a future language that is the same, is it something that is of the tongue, of the mouth, or is it a different, does it exist in a different sort of body format?
Well, you did bring up the effect of mediums on language.
Mhm.
Um, and of course, no, language has never been just utterance. Utterance is how we access it sometimes, but it's not just utterance. I mean, the drum speaks a language. Dance is a part of a language process, and these are real ways to communicate. I think the question we're really asking is, how do we communicate? Because the phone does provide. I mean, the devices provide certain parameters in which you can communicate. Like, for instance, you can't necessarily feel the body heat of who you're communicating with when you're using a device,
Mhm.
because your device has been your communication has been reduced to the parameters that the device can support. So you can
Mhm.
see, some of us can see, some of
Mhm.
us can hear, and we try to make communication happen for that. But like, for instance, when COVID was happening, as a professor, I had to deal with communicating primarily through devices.
Mhm.
And I saw it brought out a different character of my communication with people, and theirs with me, that made me long for sitting in a room, feeling their body heat,
Mhm.
smelling their presence, watching their body language really explain more in what they were saying than I could get from a flat screen at the time.
Mhm.
And even if we think back, we know that there, like when we talk about language and memory, for instance, we know that some societies were kind of taken aback when you tried to take a picture of them,
Mhm.
because life has motion in it. And if you look, for instance, at West African art, there's this elongation of the body, of the neck, of the breast, of different things, depending on what they're trying to make you feel as you look at that presentation of a person. All of this is part of communicating. But the
Mhm.
picture that they began to experience was this flat image of no movement. And even if it could capture them exactly as it looked, they felt it was profane, because it took the soul out of the image that a person wants to project. Just like when you look in the mirror,
Mhm.
you see something that not necessarily everybody else sees. And
Mhm.
part of your communication is you're projecting that something.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I find that a lot of people that communicate, for instance, professionally, spend some time in the mirror to see how they look, because they thought they looked different when they were presenting. And even though these are just pieces of communication and language, it's important. There's certain things like, you've probably heard of this: when you're in certain company, you don't um, cross your feet where your bottom of your shoes are showing, because in the cultural presentation of seeing the bottom of a shoe, it's almost like an insult in certain societies, that you don't show me the bottom of your shoe, because that's like you're throwing your shoe at me. Um, Even handshakes and all that, these are all part of communicating.
Mhm. Mhm.
Language is never just the words, it's all
Mhm.
of the body functions that happen with it, and whatever the restrictions are of the device that you're using to communicate with. So I hold in awe all of you people that actually translate or interpret, because it's hard to bring the soul back into the words. I said earlier that I read hieroglyphs, what they call in ancient Egypt, they used to call it Medu Neter, God's words, or divine presentation. That was the name of of language, actually. So it was realized.
Can you repeat that again? What's the name of?
Medu Neter is two different words. Medu means words.
Uh-huh.
Neter means the divine or God. So it's God's words. And they understood back then that communication was the thing that allowed a person to connect with other people so that you could have a society.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing. I can have some great ideas in my head, but if I can't communicate with you, those ideas don't become a reality in our interaction.
Mm-hmm.
They
Mm-hmm.
understood back then that there had to be some rules to language, and
Mm-hmm.
that language had to be dynamic, but it was also culturally based. So they
Mm-hmm.
called it God's words. Another way to call it is divine communication, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what allowed human beings to have more control over their presence. Like for instance, when human beings ran into lions and tigers, they couldn't outrun them. They couldn't fly like birds. They couldn't swim as fast as fish or stay in the water as long as fish. But when they were able to communicate, they could create the kind of cultural implements that allowed them to take lions and tigers and put them in cages if necessary, that allowed them to fly faster and farther than any bird through
Mm-hmm.
their understanding with each other and
Mm-hmm.
the things that they created, and to stay in water as long as any mammal or any fish and go faster and farther than any. That's what our species is able to do because we can communicate. And when
Mm-hmm.
we communicate, we can organize and build these other implements that may allow us at some point to travel throughout the universe. So that's what I think would be the benefit if we
Mm-hmm.
understood what we said. When we don't understand, it leads to conflict and war and death.
Mm-hmm. So if you take out the interpretation between languages, then you're saying that there is less likelihood of conflict.
No, I'm saying if you take out the interpretation of language, there's more likelihood of conflict. Even though interpretation is not perfect, it's like the best we can. Interpreters are devices,
Mm-hmm.
like our phones are. So
Mm-hmm.
you complain about certain parts of it, but your life would be harder without them. And
Mm-hmm.
without interpreters, um, our world might be a lot more divided. We can enrich and improve interpretation and translation over time, just like the devices have been improved to be able to handle some of our communication. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a necessary requirement to have interpreters and translators because over space, language changes. There's nothing
Mm-hmm.
you can do about it. It just changes over space. Have you ever played the game where you whisper? There's 20 people. You whisper something to the first person, and then by the time it gets to the 20th person, they reveal what they think the message is, and somehow it's changed in those 20 people that were whispering.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
So I think
telephone.
it happens like that with interpretation too. I
Yeah.
had a book recently that was translated into French,
Mm-hmm.
and I trust the translator.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I trust the book because I really don't know what it says.
Okay, Zizwe. So I want to ask you, 12,000 years from now, if we all speak the same language, what does that what is that language? What is it composed of? What does it sound like? What does it look like in your mind?
I think it's composed of agreements that have happened over these 12,000 years for us to agree on what certain words mean, what certain
Mhm,
phrases mean, what's the proper way to communicate the messages we have.
mhm,
In 12,000 years, our communication will probably be vastly different in terms of language than what it is right now because traveling through time, just like traveling through space, requires some kind of flexibility and dynamism so that your language can speak to what your new understanding of the world is.
mhm,
And I think if we can make it 12,000 years and can speak to each other as if we are one, um, then we won't just be on this planet. Um, I think we will be on many planets. And if we don't solve that problem within 12,000 years, I kind of doubt that we'll even be on this planet.
mm.
Yeah.
I don't know if we should end on that note or if I should I think I kind of yes, I think it's interesting that you're making a connection between the understanding that comes with shared language and what that implies for innovation and advancement. And I don't know if that's the right correlation, but that's what I'm hearing, is that if we don't find shared language, or if we don't even intend to make that like part of our sort of forward thinking goals, then we won't sort of go beyond spatially where we are.
Yeah, we will have we'll have problems if we don't find. But what I don't want to say, I don't want
Mhm.
to make us think is that there will only be one language. I think that
Mhm.
there's a benefit to having local languages, also languages that are particular to various professions and
Mhm.
crafts and all of that. It's important to have those as feeders, but on certain issues, we have to figure out how to communicate and work together.
Mhm.
But I'm not for wiping out local reality,
Mhm.
temporal reality, because all of this is part of life. Moving through time and space is part of our life, and that
Mhm.
life is what informs our communication.
Mhm.
But if we can at least buy the principle that we need to be able to understand each other in a way that helps us grow and develop, then I think that we can have this kind of lingua franca that allows us to communicate while at the same time, like I said, enriching it from our various cultural perspectives
Mhm.
with new
Great.
words. Yeah.
That was a great ending and segue now to our second question. So our second question for you, Zizwe, is
Yeah.
what if religion were to reveal the evil nature of Earth?
So I don't really know what religion is hiding in terms of the so-called evil nature of earth. And when we use the word evil, I'm
Mhm.
thinking something that potentially is species threatening. That's what I'm thinking, what we're considering evil, to give it some grounding rather than just some bad character somewhere hiding.
Mhm.
Um, and I think religion kind of tries to do that in some ways. Specifically, when I think about Christianity in Genesis, they talk about when the sons of God um, saw the women of men, they found them lovely and decided to take them. I mean, and the Bible says take. It doesn't say like, ask them, hey, do you consent? No, they took them. Okay, in that
Mhm.
situation, and
Mhm.
in that situation, um, evil becomes recognized through the sons of God. They do something that went
Mhm.
against what God wanted. They weren't supposed to mess around with human beings. Human beings were a later creation, and the angels supposedly helped God make this creation. But some of the angels kind of got lost in their creations, and they
Mhm.
start loving women and using their power as angels to seize control of women and make them wives. And that's in the Bible. That's where we get the story of the giants that lived for 300 years to nine, all these kinds of longevity, and where
Mhm.
God finally realizes that this was not my plan.
Mhm.
Therefore, humans will live no longer than 120 years, and all these other kinds of things that happen to humans. So supposedly, God translates that the fallen angels, which we call Satan sometimes, went against his plan. In that case, we don't have a natural designation of evil, but we have a part of God's plan designated as evil. And for that evil, humans had to pay. So I think even if we remove that kind of a narrative and we look at what we know scientifically about hurricanes and earthquakes and volcanoes, we'll realize that the planet is not really sensitive to the needs of humans. It's humans that have to figure out how to live in this kind of diverse environment. So I think that religion, even if it made us realize, quote unquote, the evil or the species threatening events of the earth, um, we it depends on what our approach is to how we understand that. I mean, do we just sit back and allow the hurricanes to wipe us out in North Carolina, or earthquakes to wipe us out in Haiti, or volcanoes to wipe us out wherever they prop up? The earth is a living thing, and it's going to do what it does. And it's not really, it doesn't really like send a memo to you and ask you about, hey, I'm going to shake up some stuff here. Um, are you ready? It doesn't ask you that. So it's our consciousness and our living with the planet to try to presuppose some of these things we consider to be evil and
Mhm.
turn things that normally hurt us into good things. An example is the Nile River.
Mhm.
When Africans lived around the Nile River, what we call the Nile River, what they call the Itaru, but when they lived in that river, it would flood annually about the same time each year. And each flood was like Katrina. If those who remember what happened in Katrina, where the floods came and, dragged people out of their houses and off into the ocean, like a tsunami almost every year, the Nile would do that. And for a while, it was the evilness of nature.
Mhm.
But humans, through their consciousness and through their respect for the timeliness, how they could actually calculate when the flood would come,
Mhm.
turned what used to be evil into something that would be heavenly, because
Mhm.
they made the Nile River and they created canals that allowed for transportation and development of the Nile River Society, which before
Mhm.
was just a flooded, inundated bank of water every year, now became highways and byways and pools in front of temples and everything. They used the Nile River to enrich their lives, to make them the most advanced civilization at that time on the planet that we have records of.
Mhm.
I won't say that they were the most advanced because there's always something we discovered that we didn't know. But for
Mhm.
what we know right now, they took the danger of a flood and turned it into the benefit of extra crops and travel
Mhm.
across desert, an area that had been desiccated and turned
Mhm.
into a desert.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I think if religions convinced us that the planet had evil, the kind of species we are is we said, well, if it has evil, it also has good. So
Mhm.
how do we get the good out of what we perceive as being evil? I think that
Mhm.
that's what if religions revealed that the planet will kill you if you don't take care of things and organize and humanize and harmonize, the planet will kill you. And it's not
Mhm.
and create a new species.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. What I'm thinking about is uh the direction of what evil is as being associated with a destructive force.
Hmm.
What if what was revealed is not that? What if evil, let's say,
Hmm.
was revealed as a different kind of force? Like, can evil be understood as something, as a creative force? Can
As
evil be
regenerative. Yeah.
understood as, sort of things that we think are actually, so I guess it's like, perhaps I feel like we know already that, or there's an assumption that destructive forces of the earth are sort of, like you said, a God determined, evil. But what about the evils that we don't associate with certain kinds of phenomena now?
Hmm.
If
Well,
that makes
as you were saying that, I was thinking about um, the kind of wildfires that often hit Western United States and Canada. Uh,
Mhm,
the wildfires, and for a long time, humans tried to fight the fires by just putting them out. But
mhm,
whenever they would put them out, the brush would grow so heavily that the next one was a fire that they couldn't control. So I
mhm,
think part of understanding the dynamics of the planet, and even if this was a religious kind of approach,
mhm,
is understanding that there's dialectics in everything and dynamics. There's good and bad all over. And the Africans in ancient Kemet, in ancient Egypt, understood this, which is why they never got rid of the deity called Set, which other religions later call Seth or Shaitan, because
mhm,
chaos is a natural element of the planet. So even and there's a story in ancient Egypt that the Greeks call the story between Isis and Osiris and folks like that, but in ancient Egypt they call it Asar and Oset, and it's this like struggle between the deities of good and bad. But
mhm,
those deities were always natural representations. So this is kind of a way of saying that in nature are the deities that will bless, that will give you a great harvest, that will give you medicine against disease and whatever. But also in nature is disease and
mhm,
these other things, because sometimes those things wipe away species and bring into a life new species.
mhm,
Um, and I think that that's, because I was looking in some of the comments and people were saying, trying to deal with evil in terms of Abrahamic religions. But I think almost all religions and societies deal with this concept of chaos along
mhm,
with creativity. And we
mhm,
may call it evil now because it's easy to sum it up as a bad thing.
Mhm.
In reality, chaos is almost a natural ingredient of the
Mhm.
planet we live in. Do you
Mhm.
know that even sometimes over thousands of years, even the North Pole and South Pole change their positions?
Mhm.
And if that happened right now, it would mess up our GPS, everything else. We're not ready yet for the
Mhm.
natural progression of the Earth and its so-called evilness of change, because it
Right.
changes. It's a living planet, and
Right.
that also means that at some point it may die as a planet.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I
That's
think,
a
I mean,
terrible,
we
terrible way
we
to end that conversation.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, we brought up this question, more to just kind of play with the sort of accepted notion that the earth is life-giving and the earth is, it's our home. It's, it's like, there's kind of these narratives around the earth being this big globe that just hugs us because we're its children. So we
Mhm.
were playing with, um, what if, is it possible to imagine actually the earth and the planet as this being that actually has ill intent?
Okay.
And, is that possible to imagine? And what I'm hearing you say is that it's not even, it doesn't think about ill intent. It's
Uh,
just operating from a place of function, universal, the universe's function, which is, ongoing, uh, destruction and creation.
it's hard for our ego to take it, but I don't really think the Earth really cares about you like that. I know it's really hard for our ego to take that, yeah. And if we understood that and humbled ourselves a little bit differently, maybe
Yep.
we'd understand climate control a lot better,
Yep. Yep.
because the Earth said, "Oh," I remember, I just had to say this during COVID, um, those 2 years in which in which human activity slowed down, the
Mhm.
earth quickly rejuvenated itself. I mean,
Yes.
plants, there were deer where I lived, there were deer around, more deer than people, and they was like happy. They were like, "Yeah, glad you folks stopped." And then
Mhm.
as soon as we figured that we weren't all going to die, we went
Mhm.
right back to whatever our other behavior was, and here we are.
Mhm. Mhm.
Wars, rumors of war, and
Mhm.
storms we can't handle, and just
Right.
this. I think this projection of evil is something that we project because we feel endangered, and
Mhm.
maybe we
Right.
should feel endangered
Mhm.
because it's going to be for us to bring out that thing in us that's the opposite of evil, that may make us be able to negotiate what's happening on this planet and in the solar system. Now we're not just hurt by what happens on the planet. We have all these satellites, and when there's a solar flare, your phone stops working.
Mhm. Mhm.
So this is bigger than even just the planet, and
Mhm. Mhm.
yeah, it's up to us to be able to figure out how to survive this.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay, well, I wanted to, McKinney, I actually might invite you on camera because I'm seeing McKinney's,
Yeah, I'm seeing you having this conversation over here.
questions, and I don't wanna ask, I'm not sure if I understand the question, so I don't know if McKinney, you'd like to come on camera and ask, because
You said
I don't
something
wanna
about us.
misinterpret.
Something about us not caring about our mitochondria. I
Yes.
care about my mitochondria, McKinney. I don't really know.
But McKinney might be having a connection issue. So what I'm gonna
Yeah.
share, is McKinney asks, if evil within religion were not a side effect of Abrahamic religions, where do you think the social root of the evil within religion would come from?
The concept of chaos.
Mhm.
Whenever human beings have plans, we plan. We don't
Yep.
know what we have tomorrow, but we act like we do.
Uh-huh.
And we believe any faith that we do have, people may have different ideas on what they believe is the creative force or whatever.
Uh-huh.
The one thing they kind of agree on in terms of faith is that there's a tomorrow. And
Uh-huh.
because of that, they plan for tomorrow.
Mm.
So the concept that always ruins their tomorrow is chaos. And of course, they turn it into a funny kind of statement like God laughs at your plans. Okay.
Right.
But either way, when we have plans like the time capsule,
Right.
this project itself is a result of plans. But when
Right.
the internet goes down or you have a problem, that's evil. You know what I'm saying? That's chaos.
Yeah.
People didn't do what they were supposed to do. That's chaos.
Yeah.
And so I don't think it's really just based on Abrahamic religions, though I do understand how evil makes it in Abrahamic religions makes it seem like it's something that's beyond our ability to deal with. You know,
Mhm, mhm.
it's like there's a bad God, there's a good God, and there's a bad God, but still they treat it like it's the Democratic Republican Party of
Right,
gods. Uh,
right.
but uh, uh, but I think that all religions deal and recognize the concept of chaos. And
Mhm,
they all, I think this is how all of them deal with life and death.
mhm.
And very interestingly, I found out, I thought all religions dealt with this desire for eternal life. Nobody
Mm,
wants to die.
mhm,
But then I find out that there's also Eastern religions that say life is just suffering. And when you finally live it right, you're just happy because you reach nirvana. And you don't have to deal with this playing around with living like a human being anymore. You could be part of
mhm,
the elements of the whole.
mhm,
So not everybody sees it the same way. Not everybody sees chaos the same way.
mhm, mhm,
We
mhm,
don't have enough time to talk about it, but if we did, for those of you who are really interested in studying real history, I would tell you to look at this concept of Set that's represented in the Bible as a serpent. And in the Christian Abraham religion Bible, Set is not only recognized as a serpent, but the woman is seen as the transgressor who works with Set against the rules of this patriarchal God.
mhm,
But when you study
mhm,
history, you'll find out that also in the Nile Valley history, where we
mhm,
have proof of some levels of matriarchal organization, the serpent had a significant spiritual role.
mhm,
So the Bible may have tried to come together to impact some kind of patriarchal stamp against this order of society. I don't know. But those of you who study history, go check it out because you'll find out that the older societies, the older Kush and all of that, were societies that leaned more toward matriarchal and at least matrilineal order of society. And
mhm,
also, the serpent was a very powerful, matter of fact, it's called epidemic. It's a serpent with a lion head that's in ancient Kush, that is the symbol of like a very spiritual force. And then if we take it over to the Americas, we know that we have the holy serpent or divine serpent and some of its ancient artifacts also. So the
mhm,
serpent wasn't always seen as the symbol of bad, but it
mhm,
was seen as a deity that in the battle of religions lost. And so you can't get rid of it completely. You can't get rid of chaos or
mhm,
that which represents chaos.
mhm,
They begin to put different deities in charge, like Amen.
mhm,
There's a
mhm,
whole history there. There's a whole history in the Nile Valley civilizations of where chaos had to fight order, and
mhm,
depending on who won, that was determined who had the good deities and who had the bad ones.
mhm, mhm.
Very interesting thing.
Very interesting. And I want to keep going on this, but I also really want to get to the third question. So I'm going to jump to the third question
Mhm.
or the third prompt. And our third prompt for you, Zizwe, is what if memories were to have a 3D concrete structure?
Some memories do already.
Mhm,
And I keep chasing you to the Nile Valley, but those pyramids are the oldest living building structures that we know about.
mhm,
Their memory with a 3D structure, because even most of our cultural influence comes from quote unquote the Stone Age, what we
mhm,
call Stone Age. Because every time we talk about Stone Age, people have this idea of these characters like the Flintstones, or somebody beats a person over the head with a club and then drags them away by their hair. That's not the Stone Age.
mhm,
Stone Age is when most of our languages and religions were developed.
mhm,
And this is why we have a statement like if you want to do something and you want to say it's a permanent thing we have to do, you say, well, it's not written in stone, is it? Not even
mhm,
realizing that we know that the only thing that stays in terms of a communication memory is what's written in stone.
mm,
All these
mhm,
text messages are going to disappear.
mhm,
But the stuff
mhm,
written in stone is our 3D memory that will remain.
mhm,
So yeah, memory does exist in 3D, and the same prompt that I was given is something that must have been given to ancient humans. Hey, how do we make sure this stuff sticks around in 3D?
mhm,
So they
mhm,
began to draw pictures on walls, um, put stones in circles in the sand, and also begin to create artifacts and cultural things that last longer than individuals last, in terms
Mm-hmm.
of creating some 3D memories that are not destroyed as quickly. And this is the problem right now. Really, everybody wants to not deal with paper anymore, which is like writing in wood. And now everybody wants everything to be digital. But one quick moment like that, all your digital stuff is gone. So even as great as it is, and the power it is to communicate quickly across the universe, as a memory, it's a weak kind of communication mode.
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna push you a little bit.
Push.
I'm wondering if what's written in stone, or what, these kinds of records of memory, is
Mhm.
the record of memory the same as the memory itself?
That's a good question. No, it can't be. Um, it's sort of like it has the strength of a written word. This is the strength of written word versus orature or
Mhm.
oral text and oral speaking or dance, even.
Mhm.
Um, when you write, you freeze the motion of the words.
Mhm.
I mean, they can have a flow, they can have a rhythm, but the
Mhm.
actual motion, but what you write doesn't change until
Mhm.
somebody else rewrites it or reinterprets it. Um, the actual words that were said
Mhm.
have a different kind of life. They don't last. It's sort of like the digital stuff I talked about. It doesn't last long, but it has much more vivacious. There's more. There's more in it. More soul is in the actual speaking of life, because there's the whole thing of the moisture of your
Mhm.
all of this stuff, all these biological things that happen. Right now I'm gesticulating for those who can't see. My hands
Mhm.
are popping up all over the place, all of that. You can write that, but
Mhm.
it doesn't have the same feeling, even though it has a longer life as a record.
Mhm. Mhm.
So when you see the pyramids, for instance, you'll see that there's a picture of the pyramids, I think, right up on my wall over here. And when you see them and you go close, there's still magnificent records of what existed. But when it really was built, it was built with white limestone on it with gold capstones.
Mhm.
They look like stars on the planet, on the earth. And when some subsequent societies came into power in the Nile Valley, specifically under I think it's Saladin. When
Mhm.
Saladin came to power as one of the societies that ran Egypt at that time, they stripped the limestone off of the pyramids to build a citadel, to build an Islamic mosque. And so it doesn't have that luster, but the strength of it, it was such a strong artifact that it'll last past the citadel,
Mhm.
and it still lasts right now.
Mhm.
So there's some of the soul and life of it is missing as a record of a memory,
Mhm.
and this happens. Time takes its cost on things,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
whatever the context, like you said, in the environment takes their
Mhm.
toll on things. Um, but I don't think the record is exactly. I think the record is a caricature of the memory.
Mhm. Mm,
You have a
that's
shadow.
interesting.
The shadow is part of you, but it's
Yes,
not you.
it's not you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Zizwe, I'd love to continue this conversation, but we are getting to our limit, and the social media empire cuts us off right at the time. So I wanted to end by asking you briefly and to answer briefly. Now that we've had this conversation, I want to offer you a question. In this moment, so after this speculating together, what is one of your deepest hopes for our species?
To be able to travel throughout the universe.
Mm,
I think maybe, we started here on this planet and maybe we didn't. But either way, I'm one of those people that believe at some point we'll be able to the universe will be our planet, so to speak. I'm hoping for that. And I'm
okay.
hoping, if I don't reach it in this particular individual lifetime, maybe
Hmm.
some kind of way I'll contribute to it in some other kind of way. I don't know. But I'm hoping that the species does that. I love the species. I really do.
Thank you so much for your insights and your wonderful reflections today, Zizwe. It was truly my pleasure to think about these things with you, and a gift. I want to thank everyone for accompanying us, for conversing with us today. Again, this is the first event of Terrestrials, the Time Capsule Flexing Foresight. Our next event will take place on Thursday, this Thursday, September 19th at 9 a.m. Pacific time. 11 a.m. Central Time, noon Eastern Time, and 1 o'clock Brazil time. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you for allowing me to participate with you.
Yes, thank you, Zizwe. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Okay.
Bye.
For whatever.